Hi there, welcome. My name is Lynn Dome, Woman in Cybersecurity Executive Director. We often go by our acronym WICIS, which is WICYS, and we pronounce it WICIS, like we sisters, because that's exactly what we are. We are a cyber sisterhood. And we're a 501c3 member-based organization, and our mission is to recruit, retain, and advance women in cybersecurity. And we do so by creating opportunities. We have over 5,000 members and have representation in over 70 countries. We have 40 professional affiliates in Africa, Australia, Canada, France, India, Pakistan, the UK, and all throughout the United States. We also have 140 student chapters in Canada, Costa Rica, India, Nigeria, and the UN and throughout the United States as well. So again, our mission is to recruit, retain, and advance women in cybersecurity, and we have many different initiatives that help us do that. We have an online member forum where all our members can network and connect. Within that forum, we have many different special interest groups, such as neurodiversity in cybersecurity, military spouses in cybersecurity, cybersecurity law, data privacy, you name it, we have those special interest groups and so many more. We have skill development training programs such as the WISA Security Training Scholarship made possible by Google, Bloomberg, and Facebook. We have AWS Learning Series. We have gamified cybersecurity challenges, CyberStart licenses, and fast track participation and opportunities as well. If you go to the WISIS website and look under training programs, you'll be able to see all those available to you. We have a newsletters and webinar series. We have scholarships, grants, and awards not only to our annual conference, which is March 17th through the 19th, 2022 in Cleveland, Ohio, but to other conferences as well. We have a Cyber Talent Emergencies Fund where students within their last 4 semesters of graduating with their cybersecurity program, if they have a true financial emergency, like they can't afford their rent, their car broke down, there's an unexpected medical expense, they can apply and receive up to $599 within 48 hours. So us, WESIS, as a global organization and a global community of women in cybersecurity, we not only support with the community itself, but also we're able to take off some of the financial burdens to our students so that they could get themselves out in the workforce. We have speaking and media opportunities so our members can be out there, what others can see. We have a job board plus where strategic partners like Cisco post all their jobs and they recruit from year round, and all our members could upload their resumes to it. We participate in an apprenticeship program, an internship program. We provide market research and have leadership summits, virtual and in-person career fairs, and so much more. We also have a mentor-mentee program, which we're really proud to say for the second year in a row, we have launched it, where we've developed a 12-month structured framework and curriculum designed to upskill and up-level women no matter where they're at in their careers, preparing them for their next level of advancement. This year, we have 775 mentees and 191 mentors. And then we also have a racial equity committee that ensures that us, WESIS, as a global organization, is leading internally and externally with equity, allyship, and inclusion, and what that looks like. So we owe all this special thanks to our strategic partners, AWS, Bloomberg, Carnegie Mellon Software Engineering Institute, Cisco, which is also a founding partner of ours and a strategic partner, long-term supporters. We have Facebook. Oh, of course, my dogs are barking. The one webinar, I forgot to put my dogs up in their little crates. So sorry about that. We have Facebook, Google, Lockheed Martin, Microsoft, Okta, AbbVie, JP Morgan Chase and Company, LinkedIn, Navy Federal Credit Union, Nike, Sentinel One, Wayfair, Workday, Accenture, American Airlines, Arctic Wolf, Champlain College, Dell Technologies, InvestNet, Flatiron, Fortinet, Haystack Solutions, Here Technologies, the Home Depot, IBM, Indiana University, MITRE, Motorola Solutions, Oak Ridge National Lab, Palo Alto Networks, PayPal, Salesforce, Sands Institute, Schlumberger, SmoothStack, SpearTip, Starbucks, Target, University of California, San Diego, and Verizon. Woo, that's a mouthful. And again, Cisco as our strategic partner and founding partner. So we have this great opportunity of Michele and Tammy being here from Cisco. And Tammy is going to be moderating this incredible fireside chat with Michele Guel from Cisco. And so I encourage everyone that's listening to please put your questions in the chat box at the bottom of your page here, and that Tammy will be able to get to those questions throughout the webinar. And if you haven't done so already, please engage with the WESIS organization, subscribe to our newsletter, become a member, follow us on LinkedIn. We're on Facebook, LinkedIn, Facebook group. We have a Twitter account, Instagram, YouTube, you name it, we're out there. So please join us with our mission. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and end this slide presentation and hand it on over to Tammy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lynn, for that incredible introduction. Hi, everyone. My name is Tammy Nguyen. I'm a technical program manager in the Security and Trust organization at Cisco. Today, I have the honor. Sorry about that. My right talk freaked out a little, but I'm back now. Okay. So today we have a special guest with a rather long history in cybersecurity. She had the opportunity to be a pioneer in the cyber industry. Today she will share with us some of the highlights of her career, the defining and memorable moments, as well as some of the struggles. Michele, tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got started in a technology career, and then how you pivoted into cybersecurity.
Oh, well, good morning, and thank you, Tammy. And I also want to send a huge thanks to WESIS. It's fantastic to see the growth of WESIS over the years. I remember way back when the very first conference, I think, had maybe 300 or 150. So it's fantastic to see that they have grown so much and expanded their programs. If you're listening today, it's the first time that you're ever engaged in a WESIS event. This is an organization to be involved in. It has great programs and really about promoting diversity in cybersecurity. So back to your question, Tammy, and it has been some time. I'm the grandma of cybersecurity, I guess. I often get called that. But how I actually got into technology, I remember like when I was in high school, and this was like the late 70s back there. At that time, they were like, if you want to go to college, you need to take a lot of science and math classes and all that sort of stuff. And so I was, because I did want to go to college, and I was fascinated by physics. I don't understand that now, but anyway, back then I was excited about physics. So I started as a physics major, until we got to quantum mechanics. And then I decided physics was not for me, like I couldn't do it. But I actually got into technology I was in martial arts, and I asked my karate instructor a homework question about calculus. And he asked me if I was taking any computer science classes. And I'm like, no. And this was in 1980. And he's like, in this day and age, everybody needs computer science. And so I started taking programming classes the next semester, and I was fascinated. I loved it. They were exciting. They were engaging. And I found out I actually had a skill for programming. And this was like the olden days, Fortran on punch cards. And you can look that up in the museum for all you youngins out there. But the pivot to cybersecurity was also in the olden days. It was, I think, November 8th, 1988. There was this event that happened. And at the time, we're like, what is going on? I worked at NASA Ames Research Center, and something was happening. All the machines were grinding to a halt. There was all this buzz because, we had the Cray supercomputer. We had all these computers. And within a small amount of time, we learned there was this incident. And it started on the East Coast at Dartmouth University, to be specific, I believe, and went all the way to the West Coast and shut down thousands. Now, of course, at that time, I think there was only around 65,000 computers on the internet. Anyway, so that was the Moore's worm incident that really put security on the map. And then like 3 or 4 months later, or within 6 months, I was given an opportunity or asked if I wanted to establish the security program at the NAS facility of NASA Ames Research Center. I had no idea what that meant. Like nobody really knew what cybersecurity was. I'm just like, well, that sounds cool. I think I'll take that one. And so that's really how I got my start in cybersecurity. At that time would have been 1989.
Wow, that is exciting. So, it's not a secret that you've been at Cisco for quite some time now. So, I've heard that you're the first full-time security operations person at Cisco. What was it like in those early days, and what sort of technology did you use?
So yeah, a long time, I guess, actually 25 years earlier this year in March will be 26 years. So it's been some time. It's been fun. So I remember back when I was, after being at NASA Ames for 11 years, I started interviewing other companies. And at the time I came to Cisco, it was either a choice between SRI International, which was a top consulting firm, research firm, or Cisco. And they were looking for someone to manage their security. And in those days, there were really no tools. I mean, we didn't even have extended firewall ACLs. There wasn't all these kind of tools you have today. And so and at that time, cybersecurity and security operations was all about cyber hygiene, which, by the way, we're still working on today. I'm sure all you security professionals out there are like, right, cyber hygiene. And so, you know, there were no tools. And believe it or not, in the early days, Cisco remote access was with fixed passwords, if you can believe that. There were still a lot of welcome 1, 2, 3. And, you know, some of the earliest tools were like what we would call multi-factor authentication, that you had carried a little calculator size thing around and it would give you a password. It was about managing firewall ACLs, which you wouldn't want me to manage today because I would probably screw up the network. It was about cyber hygiene. And it was about, you know, what I had done at NASA Ames was actually, we early in the industry were like, okay, here's how you secure, like, here's how you do stuff. How do you defend? What are the methods we need? And out of that became a lot of ideas for innovation on how you do the tools. So if you look at the history of RSA, I think last year, or the last time they had RSA live, they had over 600 security vendors, probably more than that. Well, in 1989, they probably had 0. And so, you know, if you go back to like 1995, maybe there was, you know, a handful or 10. And then you just look over the years how it emerged. We didn't have the tools. We were defining the tools. We were writing the tools in Born scripts, early shell, because there was no Python, or early C programs, all the sort of stuff that we did. So it was fun. It was like, okay, how do you do this? It was all manual. Like, how can we automate in the sense of automating?
So it sounds like we've talked about this. You're a pioneer in this space. You've worked in many different facets of cybersecurity, just based on what you've told us so far. Did you have a favorite area?
That's a good question. Like, you know, like today where there's lots of designations and different, like you may be a SOC engineer, or you may be a threat hunter or a pen tester, or a security, or, you know, a network engineer, like I call the rack and stack folks that configure and manage all those devices. We didn't have any of that. There was like, we were just the person. We sort of did the jack of all trades. And so, I mean, stuff was fun for a while. And then it was like, for me, I get bored if I do the same thing. So early on, like the hunt, like actually responding to the incidents, and really, how did the threat actor, and we didn't call them threat actors back then, I think we just called them hackers, like, how did they actually do this? What did they do? How did they get in? And that wasn't using all these cool tools. We had to use regular expressions and croaking out all the log files and trying to put together the pattern match. And so that was fun. But I think over the years, the most interesting segment of cybersecurity that I worked on was in the IoT space. And this was like much later in my career. I mean, I've done like almost all facets of cybersecurity, though, until more recently. Like, I haven't done pen testing, although we did that in the early days. I haven't done malware, reverse malware engineering. I was never a forensics. Well, I was a forensics person in the early days. I was pretty good on regex and some of the stuff we did. But the most fascinating area for me, I think, more recently was around IoT. And I actually did my master's research in this area. I spent about 5 or 6 years really digging down deep into the IoT space and how you secure all these sensors and have a number of talks. To me, that was the funnest, because it's everything. I mean, today we're so connected, and there's so many different things you need to do within the connected world, whether it's connected medical, connected waterways, connected, you know, transportation. There's a lot to be done, and some challenges because we're talking about small device. So I like those kind of big challenges. So I think IoT is definitely my favorite.
And you talked about these different hats you've worn. How did you pivot to these different roles?
That's a good question. I don't think it was, well, I guess it was some intentionality. I mean, you sort of specialize early on. We had to like be all hats, do all sorts of things. And then whatever, to me, it was like, well, what's most interesting? I did a lot of incident response investigation. And then I actually began to develop ways of like, how do you actually secure these systems? And I'm a teacher by DNA. That's just my DNA teach. And so I would learn how to do something, make it a repeatable process. And then I would teach others how to do it. And then I'm like, okay, what's interesting now? I want to do something funner. And so I moved away from more of the operations side and got into more of the like, okay, well, how do you actually design a secure architecture? So, and that's how I actually pivoted into the IoT space, which is not really a pillar of cybersecurity skills. It's about a whole industry that requires you to operate in the different cybersecurity skills. So it's just learning. You have to be, and most security professionals have an insatiable desire to learn. And so you're always looking at new technologies, new fascination, and you bring all your skill sets to play and all the things you remember from your whole history. Like, okay, now how would I hack this? What is the threat actor thinking, right? How do I need to secure this? And then, so I went from security architecture and then looking at large complex systems. IoT was an interesting space. So in studying IoT, then there became, from IoT, I actually pivoted into more privacy and privacy strategy because IoT is all about the data. You're collecting all this data. This is data we need. How are we transporting the data? That got into privacy engineering. And so then that was exciting to me because that's a very difficult problem as well. And so then I began a more of a narrow focus on, well, privacy is not so narrow because it includes security, but really focusing, digging down, doubling down on privacy and how do we do this in our large connected world, and talking about another pivot since we're on pivot. And of course, this is going through like many years. We're talking like 33 years in cybersecurity. So from privacy, then I had, another pivot was like, okay, now how do we create a product around that? And so I spent a whole year researching data privacy products and came up with this ideation on enterprise data visibility and control, which is on the shelf as a product idea, but you begin to just grow your skills and bring everything to the table and looking at new ways to secure things, new ways to like how the threat actor is thinking about it. And then, so what's needed? What other skill sets and technologies do we need to secure our data?
And it's, in this industry, it's just always changing and we're always talking about pivoting and, just the threat landscape is constantly changing. So during all these moves, what were some of the cultural or technological like wins and hurdles that you faced over the years?
A lot. Now, how do I want to phrase that simply? But I will say, having been the only woman in the room many, many times for many years, like literally I could be in a speaking event where I was speaking, and I've been speaking in the industry since 1988 as well, or 89, different conferences since 1990. Often like the only women in the room, or you could count them. You could count them on one hand, or you could count them on two hands. I will say early on, I didn't feel or sense the challenges, although there were some, but it was more around, I think, real stereotypes about things that women should do and things that men should do, like sort of gender boundaries. And some of those still exist today. Like if you go to a meeting and there's mixed genders, they're going to look at a woman and like, okay, you're going to do the note taker. I'm like, no, excuse me, I'm not the note taker. Things like that. Or, we need someone to make the coffee. Early on, those were actual things. And actually part of my first job was to make the coffee for the lab research scientists and actually clean the lab as well as write the code where they ran their experiments. So that was sort of like all in one. I didn't feel, I guess, and maybe I didn't think about it earlier in my career, but later on I saw like, there are disadvantages, not disadvantages, but there are some hurdles to cross, because when you're the only women in the room, or let me step back, because this is funny. This is true story, actually, until about 5 years ago. So my name's Michele, and a lot of people confuse the spelling of Michele with one L with Michael. I have a brother named Michael. And so on the internet, you can be anything. You know, the cartoon with the dog, on the internet, you could be anything. Yeah. People that only knew me through the internet, and we didn't have video calls back then, thought I was Michael. Now, I think that might have been to my advantage, maybe, because when I showed up and I'm like, they're like, oh, I'm like, no, Michael's my brother. I'm Michele. And that even happened to me probably up until 5 years ago. And so that might have been an advantage. I'm not sure. The hurdles, I think some of it is women, and this is what I see. Oops, reconnecting. I hope you can still see me. Is that, yeah, women, what I have found is we're not good at being we don't advocate for ourselves. It's not like wired in us. We're not one to like brag about our accomplishments. And even like on this, I felt weird to like putting on social media, because I don't normally do that. But we're not good at that. The men are great at it, right? They have no problems. And, we need to learn to be bragger. And so not doing that, and not having, early on, there wasn't this concept of advocates and people to speak for you or mentors. Those are some of the hurdles that I still see today. And when I mentor people, and I mentor quite a few people, it's about building in those skill sets to advocate for yourself. And I think another is in terms of having a voice in a meeting. And I've been known many years in my career as speaking truth to power. Now, this is something that you have to learn to do in baby steps, and it takes confidence. It also takes boldness, because you can have some ramifications from it, but you don't want to overspeak. Like you want I used to call it the E.F. Hutton effect, but the younger generation probably never heard of E.F. Hutton, but it's kind of the lean in and listen. It's learning that skill set that you're not just speaking to speak, but you have something very crisp to say. You have something that when you speak, they're going to go like, oh, I want to stop, look, and listen what they're saying, because when they speak, they have something that's valuable that I want to hear. So it's developing those skill sets so you make the playing field level, because typically in a room that's dominated by men, I say typically, not all the time, sometimes it's hard for the woman to get in a voice, or she'll say something and then like ignored. And then another guy halfway around the table will say the same thing. And all the men are like, yeah, that's awesome. And the ladies there going like, well, I just said that. And so it's developing those skill sets. And even when we're multiple women in a room, that we have each other's back, and we sort of encourage and cheer people on. So a number of those over the years. But I really feel that helping women early in their career learn to advocate for themselves, learning to have that right voice and using it in a meeting, learning to really, like we are sisters, like to support one another and have each other's back and encourage one another. Those are all things I think really go to making the playing field level we're in a mixed gender society. And so I think it should be equal for all.
You see, the audience can see me just nodding, and I swear I didn't know what Michele and I did not coordinate answers. I didn't know what her response was going to be, but she's speaking to my experience. There's so many times, I've been in the cybersecurity industry for almost 10 years now, and Michele's been here for over 30 years. And up until when I was joined the last few years ago, these are still some of those hurdles that I struggle personally with. And, let's jump into some of the questions we have, because I want to dive into what you were saying just a bit ago, Michele, around allyship, our male allies. We have a question about, have male allies been helpful in your career? And do you have any advice for men who want to support women?
This is often one of my most favorite questions, because yes, as many of you know me, know that there was a male ally who played a very important role in my field. But at the same time, I stepped up to take that role. And early on, early on when I worked at NASA Ames, I worked with this security researcher. His name was Matt Bishop. He's like super braino. Like I felt like I couldn't understand. He would like talk about all this crypto stuff. And I was like, I have no idea what he's talking about, but he was so nice and he worked with me. He introduced me to Alan Paller, and this was in like 1990. And he told Alan, like, you got to meet this kid. She's pretty smart. And so I met Alan, and that was before SANS was a thing. And I spoke at the first SANS event, and I helped at the first SANS event. I read papers, I spoke. And then there, Alan and I have formed a great business mentor working relationship. Still to this day, I'm involved in nonprofits that Alan has founded around cybersecurity. And he provided me many opportunities. And while some of them were scary, you know what? I stepped up to the plate and said, I'm going to try that. Just like I did at NASA Ames when I had no idea what it meant to do security. I'm like, I'm going to figure this out, right? What's to lose? There isn't a script written. I'm going to write the narrative, right? When I talk to people, I'm like, how would you do it if you were going to write the narrative? And so when he would say, hey, you know, we're going to do this next conference. Do you want to do the call for papers? Do you want to establish the themes? What do they need to know? I'm like, I'm going to do this. And so we just remained good friends over the years. And he's still a great friend and a mentor, but definitely an ally. And today there's many allies at Cisco. Actually, my current almost most of the bosses I've worked with, I think have all been great allies. But my current manager, Carlos, is a huge supporter of diversity in all areas. He's a great advocator. I mean, if you want to be an advocator, you need to speak up when they're not in the room, right? You're always like, they're on your mind, or you're hearing conversations about somebody, hey, speak up for them. Or there's an opportunity to bring somebody to the forefront as an opportunity, speak up for them. Listen, I mean, you can look around your organization, women that are in your group. You could reach out and say, hey, I just want to get to know a little bit more about you. How can I help be a voice for you? How can we work together as a team? So you can understand what some of those, we call them unconscious biases are. And we all have them. Trust me, we all do unconscious bias. So we need more male allies as well, because there are more men in the technology industry than women, and so we need those male allies.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think it's so important to have these male allies that are amplifying voices, especially like you mentioned earlier, when you're sitting in the room and people, someone's saying the same thing as you across the room, and it's like, hey, I said that. What's going on? So yes, thank you. And we do have another question from, and this has to do with, again, it's something that we both have in common, is that when we both went into security, we didn't really know what it was. Granted, mine was more recent than yours. So we have a question around, what advice would you give newbies who don't know where they best fit yet, but love cybersecurity?
I want to answer. I'm going to answer that one. It's a great question, but I want to go back and pull in what you said. Like a male ally or a woman an ally in a room, like if a woman made a statement and they sort of ignored her and went around, and another guy, a person, male or female, male made the statement that was exact, the ally would go, hey, you know what? That's exactly what she said. You're right. That's exactly what she just said 5 minutes ago. And I think it's a great idea. So that's an example of being an advocate and speaking up for the person, whether they're in the room or not. Now, going back to this questions about newbies. So this is a good question, because sometimes you don't know what it means, right? And I ask people, like, what are you passionate about? Do you like to code? Not everybody likes to code, and that's okay. Do you like the excitement for the hunt? Do you want to see the red blip go off on the screen and like, oh, what happened? Do I need to go look at that? Are you interested in data analysis? Do you like the application architecture? It really depends on what your passion is and your current area of expertise. Or maybe you love writing policies and encouraging people to adopt policies, or you're a program manager, right? There's so many things, or maybe risk assessment. There's so many different things you could do. First of all, I think a great resource, and I don't have the link handy, is SANS has like the top 10 coolest cybersecurity careers on their site. Maybe Lynn can pull it up. And that's a great way to see what the careers are. if you're not sure, and you might go, well, that sounds pretty cool. I want to try that. And part of the great thing is you could try it for a while. If you're like, well, that's not exactly my bag of things to do, you could pivot into a different one. So it's really around, like I have, and like many people have over the years, give something a try and see if that resonates with your skill sets. You find it exciting. And if not, try another one. That's what's great about cybersecurity. You can almost never get bored because there's so many different things to do.
Speaking of not getting bored, tell us about the most pivotal moments in your cybersecurity career. Like, looking back, would you have done things differently?
So yeah, I think there's a couple things. So I think about what are the most pivotal moments. Actually, and this may be out of order, but this is one that's a pivotal moment. And also I would have done things different. Right. And so this was in 2007. I was working for Mr. John Stewart, who many of you know is one of the world's best chief information security officers. What some people don't know is I hired the kid out of college in like 1991, and I was initially his mentor for many years, and then he became my mentor. So we're still great friends. But anyway, so 2007, I had been doing the same thing for quite some time. This actually goes to the burnout question too. And at that time, I didn't think, well, I should pivot into something new. Like I was doing a lot of different cybersecurity things, but I was in the same role. And you get a little bit, not rusty, but you get a little bit maybe bored or burned out, or you're not seeing everything you could see because you've been doing it so long. And I got booted out of the team. Right? And so I had to go, not booted out of Cisco. It's just like, you need to find a role in another team. Or I'll find it for you, sort of thing. And so it was pivotal because it forced me to not be so heads down. I think this is another thing that I see women do more than men, is we're so focused on, and many of us, including myself, have dealt with or dealing with imposter syndrome, right? We're all about like, I have to work harder. I have to produce more. Many women are heads down, just working, and not looking out further enough in their career. So at this point, I got booted out of the team. I had to find a new role, and I ended up in an HR security role. Like they were implementing a new HR system, and my job was going to be from the security side of things. And I'm like, people are like, what are you doing over there? I'm like, I don't know. I got kicked out of the team. But it was pivotal because it opened my eyes and made me think about different things that I should have been thinking about. How do I influence leaders? How do I influence a broader perspective? How do I think about this from different angles? Can I actually translate all my cybersecurity knowledge into a new area, which I almost have no clue about, right? From an HR hire to retire, I knew I got a paycheck. I knew they paid my insurance. I had no idea that all the HR systems are really back in infrastructure running the whole organization. And so at one point I had read every, I can't even remember what we called, like document on how they were building the new hire to retire programs. It learned so much. I learned about all the potential application security vulnerabilities, database security vulnerabilities. Like it just opened my eyes. It was like a shocker. Like so the learning was don't do the same thing for too long, right? You need to translate. And that was learned by fire, but it really, I think, springboarded my career, because after that I was like, I'm going to be more agile moving forward now. And so I've moved around quite a bit since then.
Do you think by being so focused and heads down, do you think it was the cause of your burnout, or a symptom of the burnout?
Actually don't know how to answer this, but I'll tell you what some of the root cause was. Because I wasn't good at communicating how much I was doing, right? This goes back to many women aren't like bragging, this and that. Like we had these this is back when at Cisco in the early days, I'm pretty standard now, we had domain experts we had, networking, database, like all this. And I was the security domain expert. And we had to review every project that came through IT, if it matched your domain. Okay. Well, it just happens that every project that came through, there was a security component. There wasn't a component for all the other ones. So I was looking at everything that came through while other people had a very small, this is their queue. This is Michelle's queue. And Michelle's not communicating to anyone, like how many things she's working on, reviewing all these architectures and passing on. I'm just heads down, busting my butt. And I was getting burned out. Like I was working all kinds of long hours and just not communicating. And so I was burned out. And John Stewart, it'd be funny if he's actually listening to this, saw that. And he's like, not on my watch. You need to find a new role. And, when I was, after I left or in the process of leaving, my manager at the time was like, we had no idea. It wasn't John. He was a skip level. She's like, we had no idea how much you were doing. Now we have to hire 3 people to fill your. That's a bad mistake. That's not a badge of valor. That's poor decision. And I just see a lot of women doing that today, where they feel like they just have to put so much effort to be, in their mind, I got to work twice as hard just to even the bar, when we need to be better at advocating and communicating what we're working on and communicating our desires and having that greater life balance. Yeah.
All right. So let's jump into some more audience Q&A. This one's around, current events and security. What types of cybersecurity issues and topics keep you up at night?
No. Well, actually, what I think about most is not necessarily issues. They're more like topics. So in my role now, I'm part of the CTO Office of Customer Experience within Cisco. And my job is to think about emerging technologies, emerging security technologies, and activating innovators. So my brain is wired about like, what's the next biggest thing? How can we, how do you generate ideas? I mean, a big part of that was earlier this year, I had a big focus around data sovereignty, going back to the data privacy issues, like how do we design systems, methodologies, solutions that actually help us enable that. And so my brain is always thinking about like, what's next? What sort of technologies do we need? What sort of skill sets do we need? What sort of system and processes, and thinking about from the customer perspective. I'm not thinking about, thankfully, I don't have to think about like, is the company getting attacked? Because I'm not in that role anymore. And so that's sort of nice. I don't have a pager. Literally, I had a pager for years. I don't know how many years. And I was the only one on pager duty at Cisco, I think for like a solid 3 years before we had a rotation. This was in the mid 90s. And a while ago, I actually found the email I sent to my boss at the time saying, hey, I think it's time we establish a pager duty rotation, because I've been on pager duty for like 3 years. And it's kind of a bummer. Yeah, I know. And so I don't have to be staying awake thinking about what's the latest cyber attack getting to me. My brain's always worried about like what's coming down the pipe, what's cool, how do we solve some of these security solutions today, how can we innovate on it.
I can't imagine. So in my previous role, for the audience that don't know, I was a security analyst on the computer security incident response team. So part of my job was we would do weekly rotations of responding to all the security incident reports that come in from inside and outside of Cisco. And I can't imagine doing that for 3 years. So thank you, Michelle, for saying we need to set a pager duty rotation on this, because I'm tired. And, I think that goes back to what you were saying before, was advocating for yourself, communicating about it, because it's one of those things where, like, if people are so used to, like, Michelle's got it, maybe she likes doing it, or, and sometimes people do. Like, the communicating and what you want to do with your career is so important. So yes, thank you for communicating, because, here I am years later, I'm like, oh, thank goodness. So let's talk about the future. Looking forward into the future, what do you see in terms of trends, challenges in security, or even, women in technology? What are we going to face next?
I think, and I see one of the questions that came up about AI and machine learning, right? If you think about what the fourth industrial revolution, which we're in now, and looking at what the fifth industrial revolution, right, with automation, with AI, with ML, and all the data that we get from the connected world, and 5G, right? You got to add into 5G because that's the fourth industrial revolution. All the different things we can do. So think about, you're a top-notch surgeon in Israel, and you're so I'm the surgeon in Israel, Tammy, and you're the patient with a very unique cancer, but I'm the one that did the research and have the ability to do surgery. So in the fourth industrial revolution, with robotics, with AI, with 5G, I'm going to perform the surgery from Israel, and you're in an operating room at Stanford University. Now, how do you feel about that? All right. So that's the landscape. Yeah, you're like, I don't know about that. So that's the landscape that we're in the next century, like the automation. Right. If you think about, like, in the olden days, and I know many of you are probably younger than some of the grandkids I have, for sure, because I have grandkids in their 20s and 30s. I have some great grandkids too. It was about visible, like, there's a saying, right? You can only secure what you know you have. And if you can't see it, you don't know it's there, right? In the early days, there was no visibility. Like, I knew, like, my first security job, like, I have like 150 hosts, and that's because that was in the R host file. And, we did this remote login to all these hosts. If you plug something else in the network, I had no idea that you did, right? Unless I decided to scan the network. So if you think about today, over time, the way that we were able to secure stuff is to be able to have that visibility, right? I actually know what I have on my network. I have the ability to detect when somebody else plugs something into the network. I have the ability to see some anomalous traffic. I even have the capability with these AI ML learning models that, hey, there's a specific indicator of compromise. I know this attack goes to this nation state attacker because we built in all the automation to these systems. And not only it's on my system, because I have a database, like I'm running AMP, on my endpoint, it actually has a view of all the attacks happening out there in the world. And if it sees like a piece of malware on my laptop, actually say it saw it on Lynn's in WESIS, where whatever state that she's in, and then it saw here, like, it's going to have the pre-warning. And so when we look to the future, now you hear them talking about full stack observability, right? Observability at every place, through the whole architecture, through the whole application architecture, down to the microservices. What's happening in each one of those. You have that observability. So we know about everything, right? And the only way that we're able to digest and analyze that is using the power of AI and ML, and in some case, natural language, all that goes into the augmented reality, or whatever you want to call it, right? I'm laughing because I'm starting to laugh because we actually used to talk about AI in the late 80s. And at that time, it was the HAL 9000. And so when you think about what we have today with like machine scale, I know it's funny, but it's like that wasn't even artificial intelligence back then. But now we have like all this learning. And so the future is going to be more robotic everything. Like today we have robotic assistants. I can see the future where you actually have these full size scale. I mean, you could actually have your device, but it would be funner if I had like a life-size robotic assistant, and it has the power of AI in all my life's learning. Like it actually had all my knowledge, it would be kind of scary though, but all my activities. And actually if it knew all the presentations and papers and everything I did from a cybersecurity perspective, think how much more productive I'd be when I have a new problem. Be like, well, Michelle, in 1993 in October, you actually wrote about this. And then I like jogged my memory because I can remember that. But we're moving into that where all our future technology, I mean, you're learning about it from all the past, but when we have this capability. So what I'm saying is everything is turning to this automation, whether they're chat robots, they're programming robots that are writing our code. Right now we're in the world of no code, low code type scenarios, and you could have Scratch for adults, which I think is funny, right? Started in MIT learning kids, and now you actually see these whole programming languages that look like Scratch for adults that are like no code, low code scenarios, right? If we could actually, the more we add in the automation and we could secure that, it's moving. But we also know, and I say this all the time, that whatever can be used for good can be used for bad. And so the threat actors are out there, and they're in most cases better connected than we are. They're studying the problems, right? The threat actors, as well as I was on a call earlier today at Cisco where we were highlighting Karen Elazari in Israel. She's a friendly hacker, right? Or security researchers, as I call them, a friendly hacker, right? They're more connected, and so they're studying how to bypass the security controls, and we know they're doing that in the AI realm. And so that's like the next, as we're into this fourth industrial revolution where we have automated everything. We have these huge learning models and databases where all the information is there, and you truly, I don't know if you could truly be anonymized when you start combining all these data sets. You have adversarial AI and bring into that all the things around 5G and how we need to secure the 5G total network with 6G coming behind it. It's just more. We can't scale, but automation is going to scale for us. And as we move into having things like full stack observability and being able to secure at every microservice or API in the architecture, it ups our game. But that means that as security professionals, we have to have future-ready skills. We have to be looking ahead to what's coming down the pike and not waiting, okay, well, I'll get that. We have to be very progressive in learning the latest technologies and keeping up to date on what happens and thinking forward when we're designing out these new products. Like, well, how is the threat actor thinking about this? How might they try to use this for bad? Or what doors and windows and applications or, port numbers are they going to try based on our knowledge before? So when I think about the future, I think about there's a lot of challenges there. We still need to solve some of the old challenges. I would love if in my professional career, somebody would really solve the challenge of having these reusable plain text passwords, right? That's just been around too long. And we do have some technologies now where we could do away with them wholeheartedly, but I think it's just going to take a while to adopt.
That's so much stuff. There's so much for us to think about. And, like you said, it's, these researchers have all this information, and they're always going to be, unfortunately, ahead of the security practitioners, the defenders. How do you keep up with, the next technology area or current events in the cybersecurity field?
No, that's a good one. I should knew. My aging brain is hard to keep all this knowledge in, but you have to be proactive. A lot of people say, well, I don't have time to do that. But if you're a security professional, you have to make time to be looking what's coming out in the latest trends. At least get a summarization feed somewhere. You need to know about whether the latest big threat that happened or the vulnerabilities, or if there's a certain area you're in. Like when I was, and I'm not in the IoT space anymore, but when I was looking at IoT, I was always looking at like what different types of devices are they attacking. Then what are these micro operating system on these devices? How the actual sensors design, right? I would just be looking more and more, and so gathering the research. And there's so many different places to find information and stay up to date on all that sort of stuff. Like, you can even do there's like so many. There's all these micro learning certificates that you can get. Many organizations offer training on site. Like at Cisco, we have, now I forgot the name, but Degreed, right? So Cisco uses the Degreed platform. There's always ways that as individual, we have to be continuous learners in the security industry and also differentiate, because you're going to get bored in one area. And so you have to make the time to do it, whether it's part of your work day, choose a particular day of the week or time, or part of a snippet. Like I'm on multiple Teams rooms where they highlight different things that are happening, or internally at Cisco, Tammy, we have the whole attacks mailer list, and you can see what they're talking about. You have to have that desire and make an intentional effort to stay informed.
Do you have, you kind of touched on it already about, these mailing lists that we have, these various learning pathways. What is your favorite or, go-to routine to stay up to date? Give us, share a little bit of Michelle's brain and her routine with us.
I think I'm on a number of internal Teams rooms where they have summary information on there, and one where they pull in like the InfraGard daily report. It lists all the highlighted things. I think Talos is also great. When I hear about some big event, and whether it's solar winds or the pipeline or something of that nature, I can always go over to the Talos research and usually get a real deep dive on that. I like the SANS Institute. They have a reading room of a large library of things to read. And I just, I see things come up on the news feed, and I'm doing talks quite frequently. And so when I'm doing the talks, I'm always out looking what's the latest. And I usually end up on a bunny trail. Like I'm trying to find a good story to talk about in my talk. And then like, oh, that's really fascinating. And then I'm off looking at all the sort of stuff. And a few hours later, I come back, I'm like, oh. So it just, I like it all. It's interesting. And so you have to also have the mindset anywhere. Earlier this week, I was on an internal thing we have around teaching people to be innovators, like first-time inventors, and their presentations from people who never filed a patent or anything. And many of them were like, we're on 5G. And I'm like, well, I have so much to learn on 5G. They were like very informative. And so, it could be internal to your work events. It could be Bright Talk events like this. There's many talks. Just figure out what you like. I mean, I do a variety, and just stay engaged and enjoy reading the stuff and staying up to date.
There's been, as someone who's been, my role is the defensive role for quite some time now in the incident response space. And I talk a lot about this with my colleagues who are, on-call investigators. So they're the frontline defenders for Cisco and other companies in the industry. And there's just so much, we talk about, okay, well, how do you stay up to date? But also, what do you do when there's so much information and it's just, there's this constant, it gets to a point where you're like, I really need to really need to be on top of it. And it sometimes, it can lead to burnout of just, there's been a lot of articles and talk on social media about burnout in the security industry because, we are always playing defense against the bad actors. How do you stay grounded, and how do you filter out all the noise, so you're focusing on how are you filtering out the noise so you can be productive?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Tammy. I mean, the burnout is real. I've seen a number of articles. I know Cisco recently published an ebook. To me, I think the burnout is multifaceted. One, it's burnout from people just working too hard, right? There's too much on their plate. And security, I think every security professional will probably agree, there's never enough resources, there's never enough time, and you can't say no because it's about securing the infrastructure, right? And so then security professionals feel like we always have to handle everything. I know back in the days when I was in InfoSec, I was on the same team that Tammy was on for some years. It's hard to say no, but if we don't do that, Cisco could have a vulnerability and we could get breached. But you have to prioritize that, and you have to realize that we can't do it all. So I think that's the burnout from just feeling like you can't say no. So over the years, I've gotten quite good at saying no and prioritizing. The second burnout, I think, for women goes to they feel like they have to work twice as hard to be on an equal par with their male counterparts, and they're not good for advocating. And the other factor is the burnout from feeling those cultural inequalities. Now I can't think of the name of it. But for example, they say stuff microaggressions, all that sort of, you just get like, you're tired of putting up with it. And so then people get burned out because of that. And the other burnout is because you're doing the same thing for too long. It does get boring. You have to be agile. You have to differentiate. You have to try new things. Sometimes you need new teammates. Sometimes you need a new boss. You just need a change of environment. I'm not saying you need a new company, because there's many things to do. And if you have cybersecurity skills, there's many things you could do. So when I look at that, I mean, I've made many mistakes. This is actually a good one. I've made many mistakes in my career, working too many hours, being burned out, not having appropriate boundaries. I mean, being on pager duty for 3 years was pretty extreme. And just not advocating for myself, all those sort of things. I learned the hard way. I really learned the hard way. And so that's why I'm such a great proponent and a voice for others. Like I mentor others out of all the mistakes I made. And later in my life, right? So later in my life, I focused on other things. Like, I mean, I did get married in my 30s. I had stepkids. I have grandkids. I have great grandkids. I have a wonderful husband, a family life. We spend a lot of hours in ministry. I have a passion for helping others, not only mentor others, for helping others. And so I think it's that balance. So yes, I'm a technology expert. I love technology, but I'm also an ordained pastor. I love helping people. And I think it's important to establish boundaries for yourself. Some people like, I'm cool. I can work 60 hours a week and I can balance my family work. Other people are like, no, I'm only going to work 40 hours a week and I'm going to not miss my kids' soccer matches or whatever it is. I think everyone needs to establish the boundaries that work for them. They may be different. And we're not just a security professional. We're people. We like to do things outside of the office. We like to go for walks, bikes. I think it's just very important to be well-rounded. And if you're burned out, if you're feeling frustrated and you're feeling like you want to quit, that's when you need to reach out and talk to people, get a mentor, talk about like, hey, how do I actually consider a different role? Help me out here. Don't do what happened to me. Like I got booted out of the team and then like my eyes open and then I've made changes since then.
Wow. Thank you, Michele, for sharing. You know, I'm sure some of those stories are, in the moment, it was very difficult to process. Like, you know, I'm burnt out, but I don't really know I'm burnt out and I'm being moved, you know, out of my team. And, you know, I'm glad you can look at it now in hindsight and say, you know, I was burnt out and I needed this change to get through it. Thank you so much for sharing your career journey with this group today and answering our questions. It's, you know, you and I, we've known each other for a while now, and it's like, you know, it's each time the discussion, it's never the same. And thank you so much to the audience for your questions today too. It kept us on our toes. So before we close out today's webinar, I want to remind everyone that Cisco will be hosting another webinar on Tuesday, November 9th on a very specific topic we've already talked about today is around male allies. It is Cisco's purpose to power an inclusive future for all. So please join us to hear about the role of male allies in helping to foster an environment of diversity and inclusion at Cisco. Thank you for taking the time to join our webinar today. Special thank you again to you, Michele, and thank you to WeSys for hosting Cisco.
Awesome.
Bye, everyone.